Okay, so our lesson today focuses on the time period between 1876 and 1896, and we're really going to focus on political issues during this time period. This is the time period post-Reconstruction, or after the Reconstruction era that came after the Civil War. During this time period, you have your two political parties, Democrats and Republicans, and they really are, equally popular, but standing for different things. And there's a lot of tension between the two of them. So this picture here shows a elephant representing the Republican Party and a donkey representing the Democratic Party. And I think it highlights the theme of the unit, which is that they were in conflict with one another. And we're going to talk about exactly why and how. The first thing I want to do is just go through who were the presidents during this time period. I think the overview hopefully will be helpful. I've highlighted in red those Republican presidents and in blue those presidents that are Democrats. And so we have Rutherford B. Hayes, our first post-Reconstruction president, James Garfield, who was not president for long because he was assassinated, Chester A. Arthur, who took over after James Garfield, Grover Cleveland, who was the only president to serve 2 terms non-consecutively, and then in between his 2 terms was Republican Benjamin Harrison. So what were the issues of the time period? What were the political parties disagreeing about? So the first issue we're going to talk about is something called the spoils system or the patronage system. And this is something that causes a lot of disagreement and division and is really going to play a big role in Garfield's assassination. So the patronage system, your textbook defines it as a system where government jobs went to supporters of the winning party in an election. So in essence, politicians would give jobs to their friends or people who supported them. In many cases, perhaps they got financial support and they'd get rewarded with political positions. Some people thought this was a problem, it was corrupt, and they wanted to change it. They wanted to bring about reform. It's not like it was a new thing. It had been a part of American politics for a long time. But in the late 19th century, in particular, it became a central part of the debate, especially within the Republican Party. It actually caused divisions within the party. There were those who were called stalwarts, who supported the patronage system, and they resisted change. They said, let's keep things the way they are. It's working just fine. And then there were those who wanted to reform. They were called half-breeds. They wanted to end the patronage system, bring about change, change the rules, if you will. So this becomes a real big issue in the presidential election of 1880. The Republicans win the election despite having nominated both a half-breed and a stalwart for president and vice president. This really shows you the divisions that existed. The fact that they nominated one of each to political office. This upset a office seeker, a guy named Charles Guiteau, and he decided to take out his frustrations. He wanted a job. He didn't get one because Garfield didn't believe in the patronage system or wanted to reform the patronage system. And so his solution was to assassinate Garfield so that we could have a stalwart become president or someone who was a believer in the patronage system. So here's a picture from newspapers at the time depicting the assassination. Not sure how accurate that is, but this guy acted on his own, and he ended up shooting Garfield, and Garfield later developed an infection and died. So what are the consequences of this? There's a big debate over what should be done, and some people say, well, now is the time to bring about reform. We just had a president get assassinated. We need to, make sure we, do what he would have wanted to do. But others still, debated it. So, one of the things we're going to be talking about is this a bad system or not? And if you wanted to get rid of the system, how exactly would you go about doing that? So the government ends up passing a piece of legislation, which we're going to take a look at and read, called the Pendleton Act, which created a bipartisan commission, people from both parties, that would help to decide who would be eligible for presidential appointments and government jobs. We're going to take a close look at this and try to examine, whether or not it was an effective piece of legislation and whether or not it really solved some of the problems or if there really were problems at all. So while we have these political debates going on within the Republican Party, we also need to talk about the differences between the two parties. So the Republicans they were a upper New England or upper Midwest political party. You have that same sort of Northern Party mentality that existed during the Civil War, and they're seen as the party of reform, the party of change. They're not a very old party. They'd only been around since the 1850s. The Democrats, on the other hand, they're still strong in the South, but they're also beginning to get support in a number of big cities amongst immigrants and Catholics. And they see themselves as the party of personal liberty. This is kind of ironic because we're only a few years removed from slavery, and the Democrats strongly supported, or many of them strongly supported slavery, although not all of them. So you have these two parties that are, appealing to different parts of the countries and different types of people, which is, of course, a theme that continues throughout American history. And they're pretty equal. They have almost equal amounts of total support. And while Republicans do have 4 out of the 6 presidential elections between these 20 years we're talking about, the House remains under Democratic control for many of those years. You really have divisions and splits across the country politically. So we see this in 1884, where we have an election between the Democrat Grover Cleveland and Republican James G. Blaine. And Blaine is going to be accused of corruption. Corruption is going to be a big issue in this campaign. They're going to say he's connected to railroads and scandals involving railroad companies. Cleveland's going to have his own scandals, and it's going to come out in the campaign that he has a 10-year-old child that he had out of wedlock, and that's going to become an issue. But he's going to be able to basically tell the truth about it, and people are going to overlook it or move past it as a political issue, and Cleveland's going to end up winning it. He's going to get the support of what are called mugwumps, who are Republicans who aren't happy with Blaine. They don't like him. They think he's not a good candidate because of his kind of connections to political corruption. So they're going to flee the party and vote for the Democrat. And Cleveland is going to end up winning the election. Cleveland has a difficult path, and this political cartoon from the time period kind of shows him trying to navigate rough waters and kind of travel between people. Once again, we still have the issue of the patronage system kind of floating around, and office seekers on the other side. It says, there are mother-in-laws who are after him. Actually, Cleveland was a bachelor, and that was an issue in the campaign, of course, with the unveiling of the fact that he had a son, and he wasn't married. So that was another issue, and you have all these other political discussions and political issues, and the name of his boat is Good Luck, because he has a tough path. When he's president, there are problems and attempted solutions. So he has an economic issue, the problem. Large businesses were able to negotiate cheap railroad transportation, but small businesses couldn't do this and suffered. This was one thing that people thought the government should try and solve. And the solution, the Interstate Commerce Commission, didn't really work. The Interstate Commerce Commission was a government commission that regulated railroad rates to what they considered reasonable, and allowed small businesses to hopefully be able to negotiate low railroad rates just as much as the large businesses could. This turned out not being particularly effective because it was left up to courts to determine whether or not railroads were being fair, and they didn't always do that. So, people were frustrated that Cleveland didn't solve all the problems. On the other side, we have Benjamin Harrison coming along. In the next election in 1888, you have people who are frustrated with Cleveland, so they vote for a Republican. And, Harrison barely wins the election. It was basically a 50-50 tie, but Harrison wins the Electoral College. And during his presidency, you have more government reform, economic issues. You have a new tariff bill, which changed tariff rates on some products. It raised tariffs on other products. It lowered tariffs. We need to remember that tariffs are taxes on imported goods, and this was something that a lot of people wanted to see adjusted as our economy kind of changed and strengthened after the Civil War. This law wasn't particularly well thought out, and it ended up causing a major budget deficit, which a lot of people were frustrated with. And then you also have the Sherman Antitrust Act, which is a response to popular pressure. A lot of people wanted the government to pass a law that allowed them to limit the power of large businesses and large trusts or agreements between corporations. But once again, like the ICC on the last slide, the courts did not strongly enforce this at first, and so it was seen as ineffective. So we have two presidents in the 1880s who aren't particularly popular, and aren't seen as solving the country's problems. And so, in conclusion for this particular lesson, we need to take a look at the theme that we kind of see throughout this whole presentation, which is that Americans are frustrated with the lack of progress made by Democrats and Republicans. They feel that neither party is really fully solving the country's problems. There are a lot of people who are frustrated. They've tried them both out. They've gone back and forth. And this is going to encourage them to look towards a new party for solutions. And that's where our lesson is going to turn next, as a new party comes along and kind of changes politics in America and changes the way we look at the party system, or at least temporarily.